around about Christmas and heading into New Year, I was kind of in a bit of a state of confusion and, shall we say, questioning, not despair or fear or anything, but I was thinking about the fact that we are indeed in World War III. But a lot of us could see this coming, and a lot of us knew that it had begun really in earnest, I suppose, in Ireland around August of 2020, when the psyop of making people wear masks began. Um, this war is not going to be one fought by huge armies or fought in the trenches of Flanders or fought by the RAF or Luftwaffe. This is an entirely different war, but a war that it is. But the problem with this war, as I had seen it, is that it is a global war being enacted by national governments against all the people. So the good or bad dichotomy, the very clear dichotomy that existed, say, in the Second World War, the good guys were the Allies, the bad guys were Hitler and his Axis, that's not here. We don't have that particularly simple paradigm that existed in the Second World War. And I was wondering how those of us who are resisting what's going on could hook this to get the normies on our side, because this is what we have to do. And I realised, I saw a post on Facebook, quite an incidental post, I think, by a Jamie Fletcher from Northern Ireland. He has a YouTube channel. He doesn't have very much material on it. Jamie the Archer is his YouTube channel. I have a YouTube channel at the moment. The way things are going, I probably won't have one by tomorrow morning. But, you know, we'll talk about that presently. Jamie wrote in his Facebook post that if you still now, January of 2021, are believing the same stuff that you were believing in March of 2020, and you still believe we should be wearing masks, and you still believe we should be social distancing, and you still believe all of this, then you are a victim of a cult. And that's true. I agree with him. And I had a flash of inspiration when I read that particular post on Facebook. You are a victim of a cult. Because if we look at cults, cults aren't necessarily a crowd of people living on an island or down in the jungle with Jim Jones drinking Kool-Aid. It's a cult is quite eclectic, and it's quite broad. What could form a cult? I know that myself because I've seen people who have been in cults. One of the defining features of a cult is that you, at some subliminal level, choose to ignore the evidence in front of you. That is really what defines a cult. The Jonestown cult ended when Jim Jones told parents to kill their own children. And they did. That's the behaviour of somebody who's in a cult. The only difference between the Jim Jones cult and the COVID cult is by degree. And I emphasise that. It is only by degree. We haven't got to the point where people are telling their children to kill, where the government is telling people to kill their own children. But there's no reason, given the insanity that has happened in 2020, why that couldn't arise. And indeed, it is the logical conclusion of what we're encountering. People have gone insane. Now, if we view this, what's happening with COVID, as a cult, then us out here who are not victims of this cult, like myself, like Jamie, like Thomas Sheridan, like Dave Cullen, like a number of people here in Ireland. Dave Cullen has had his YouTube nobbled. Great sign of, it's a great accolade these days to have your YouTube nobbled. But anyway, those of us out here need to realise that everybody else, all those normies and NPCs, they are in a cult. So we need to, actually, I think, without having clarified it the way Jamie Archer did, or Jamie Fletcher did, I actually was thinking along the same lines, because what I said in February of 2020, when the Irish people let 35 Fine Gael TDs back in, I said, well, they deserve whatever they get, and I'm forgetting about going into politics now. and I'm focusing on mainstream media, I'm focusing on the media thing. The fact that I changed tack doesn't mean that I stopped, far from it. Then, just by coincidence, I got better equipment in my office. I've still got better. I'm still improving it all the time. And I'm able to do these kind of podcasty videos, which I do on the hoof here. So this is all, you then, as Thomas Sheridan says, you see synchronicity. This is synchronicity. I just made my mind up in early February of 2020. I said, the problem is the mainstream media here, because the Irish people should by now have seen what a deficient crowd Fine Gael are. And they should have voted for anyone else. The fact that they voted in such a way to allow 35 Fine Gaelers and 18 Greens into the Dáil, well, they deserve whatever they get. But I don't deserve it. So I also said, well, I'm now looking out for number one. That actually carried me very well through the whole COVID cult of 2020, because I just said it's Fine Gael and the Greens, and they're all psychotic communists anyway, and they're telling lies. And you just have to see the best way to protect yourself. Do your own thing. Don't be bullied into wearing masks. Don't social distance. Don't do any of that nonsense. But don't cause trouble for yourself. So that's what I did. But in fact, Jamie is right. Jamie Fletcher, not Jamie Archer. Jamie is correct. It's a cult. Because the COVID cult is actually a subset of a larger cult. The larger cult is one that has grown over at least 30 years, if we take Ireland alone, possibly Northern Ireland and the Republic together. That cult is the notion that the government can sort out all your problems. The notion that the government can make the grey clouds go away and bring in blue skies. The notion that the government can solve everything. Anarchists, classic anarchists, aren't people who say there should be no laws. Classic anarchists are people like myself who say that government is a necessary evil. In essence, the people who founded the United States of America were of that opinion. They wanted to get away from the overbearing control of a British king. There had been a collapse in the economy in 1720. The British economy had contracted in the space of about a year by 30%. So what the British Exchequer began doing was it began squeezing dry its 13 American colonies, and it paid the price for it in 1776. Because what happened that led to the revolution in 1776 was a series of events. The 13 British colonies didn't just say, well, goodbye London, we're dropping you. There was a whole incremental chain of events that led to that. This is what we're encountering now in early 2021. The cult that we're dealing with here in Ireland, be it Northern Ireland or the Republic, is the broader cult of expecting the government to do everything for you. Now, psychopaths like David Cameron came out with this rubbish of the big society, in which he was effectively trying to gaslight people out of that knowledge. And the big society was typical psychopath rubbish from David Cameron. David Cameron's a barking psychopath. Dreadful individual, David Cameron. People who've met him say that he has that whole lizard thing going on. Yeah, I believe that. He'll switch on if he thinks you're somebody he should talk to. Horrible man, David Cameron. But David Cameron's rubbish of the big society was an attempt to kind of latch on to this growing sense that was nascent even by then, and led to the creation of libertarian parties like UKIP. UKIP got infiltrated by cranks, so did Direct Democracy Ireland. That won't last. Eventually people will get their act together, and there will be a proper patriot party in both the UK and in Ireland, and they'll work together. The Irish and British alternative people are already looking at one another. The Irish, British alternative and American alties are all looking at one another. When you have Stix Hexenhammer talking about Dave Cullen, Stixie based in Vermont, although Stixie is Vermontese, I think he's based in Amsterdam at the moment. You have Stixie, you have Dave Cullen, and Stixie is a big fan of Dave Cullen, rightly so, and gives him a lot of praise. All of the alties in the English-speaking world are coming together. We're all beginning to look at one another and see how we can help. We help each other just by continuing to do our thing, but also by cross-referring to each other's work. We are anarchists. We don't have an editor over us. We set our own agenda. That's why we're so powerful. In my case, part of my power comes from the fact that I'm not looking for money. People should realise how terribly powerful that is when you aren't looking for money, because it means I don't get copyright strikes. So anyway, we are on the outside, and we need to actually adopt those techniques that experienced cult breakers use when they have a loved one who is a victim of a cult, and you've got to get in and rescue them. So there are established psychological or anthropological techniques that people use to break through the matrix of a cult. That's what we have to do. In Ireland, the cult of COVID comes, as I said, it's a subset of the bigger cult of RTE, Irish Times government. The enablers of the cult of big government are primarily the Irish Times and RTE. If they weren't there, if they weren't doing what they do, or an equivalent wasn't doing what they do, it would be a very different scenario here. I became aware of the cult. I woke up to the cult to an extent in 2019 when I realised that RTE was telling lies to protect Leo Varadkar. That was my red pill regarding RTE. I was never a big fan of RTE. I always thought the programming was fairly dreary and mediocre. But I changed. That took me over a line. I said, no, they're the enemy. They're working to harm people. That's not just a question of negligence, what RTE are doing. I've mentioned it. I mentioned it to Greg Moffat on Legalised Freedom. I was quite specific with Moffat, so I don't need to go into details here. But I gave the specific instance of what RTE was doing, where I said, no, that's not a mistake on their part. That's a lie. They're telling lies. So the enablers of the cult are RTE and the Irish Times, and certain other outlets as well. News Talk is diabolical, but it's RTE and the Irish Times have the ear of the nation in that regard. This is where many people for many decades have warned about the potential of RTE's market dominance in Ireland to become abusive. Well, it has. And we saw it particularly in 2020 with the COVID thing. I was talking to a woman recently. She rang last week to check up on my mum. And she was saying, you know, how can you get people to comply? If people would just comply, we could be rid of this thing until they all get the vaccine. I said, have you ever heard of human nature? She said, what do you mean? I said, what do you think I mean by human nature? I said, people don't obey stupid, totalitarian, all-encompassing rules. It is not in human nature to do otherwise. Oh, well, she said, if you're meaning all of those kids who have been out partying and not social distancing, well, maybe so. I said, if we just accept that your premise is an accurate one, that COVID-19 is a terrible, 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 terrible risk, and that we can alleviate this risk before everybody gets injected with aborted fetuses from a skip behind Bill Gates' house. If we can just get everybody to socially distance and wear masks, I said, is that what you're saying? Yes, she said. Well, I said, you know, there is an instance of a group of people who didn't socially distance and wear masks. It was disgraceful. I know, she said. I said, I'm talking about those stars in RTE. Oh, well, she said, now you're being silly. Oh, no, I said. Now you're being silly. I said, because those stars in RTE have been the main cheerleaders of this cult since March. Yet what they did with that retirement for a colleague was they proved that they didn't believe the very cult that they are promoting. So they're hypocrites, whereas I'm not, because since March I've been saying this is a lie. This is a scam. So I have been completely true to my beliefs. I have refused, on pain of going to jail, to not wear a mask. I don't socially distance. I don't do elbow bumps with people, like I've escaped from a lobotomy ward. I could use far more offensive remarks. I'm not doing an offensive video at the moment. I'm keeping it relatively clean. But, you know, I didn't say to that woman what Jamie had observed because I hadn't read Jamie's Facebook post yet. I'm sorry, if I spoke to her again, I'd say it now. You are a victim of a cult because you are denying the facts in front of your very eyes. Those people in RTE during a level 5 lockdown broke all the rules. They didn't get punished for it. They were made watch a 10-minute video, and Eileen Dunn had to give an apology in the news. That should tell you something. It doesn't tell me anything because I knew it already, but that should tell you something. And then she said, well, I'm just fed up with all of this anyway. Yes, I said, so am I. Except for the fact, I said, that I didn't buy into this. I know it's a lie. Well, she said, I'm just really not able to argue with you at the moment. Well, I said, come back to me when you feel you're ready to argue with me about this. I said, that's fine. I said, I'm not going to force my views on you. I said, but if you feel that you want to have a rational argument, I'll give you 3, 4, 5 hours to talk about this. I said, so you know where I am, and pick up the phone, come down to my house anytime. I'll make you coffee, I'm not socially distancing. You come down to my house, or ring me, or email me, and we can argue about this as long as you want, I said to her. And she went silent. This is what Thomas Sheridan describes as when the software begins to break down and go beep boop, bleep bloop bloop bloop. I can't. There's no video in this. This is just a soundtrack. Please imagine Thomas's face or his eyes roll, because he does it so well. He does it so well. When he does those, when he's singing as well, when he's pretending to be Glenn Hansard, he made me fall off the bed laughing. And it shouldn't. I mean, it's real silly humour. When you think about it, it's very immature humour. But it is, when Thomas does all of those silly voices and that kind of, it's absolutely hysterically funny when he does all of that kind of thing. But this leads on to something else. Donald Trump is not going to be getting a second term. Now, some of the tinfoil hatters are still saying that he will and all this, but he'll rise like a phoenix and something will happen. It's not going to happen. Biden's going to be inaugurated on the 20th or 20th. That's the 21st, I think. It's not the right turn of events. It's profane, as Thomas said. Yes, it is profane, but it's going to happen. It is going to happen. Here's a problem. Donald Trump reminds me very much of Mrs. Carmody in The Mist. I've talked at length about that brilliant film before. What defined Mrs. Carmody was that, 1, she was an awkward character, so was Trump. 2, she had devoted followers, many of whom seemed cultish, so does Trump. 3, there were other people in the more centre ground who admired her, so does Trump, because I'm one of Trump's admirers. 4, the normies didn't like Mrs. Carmody. The normies don't like Trump. And 5, she was afraid of nothing, and Trump is afraid of nothing. So Trump is Mrs. Carmody. And what happened, now here's a plot spoiler of the film The Mist, which is an adaptation of Stephen King's short story. The film is much better. I don't think Stephen King is a good writer at all. Far too verbose. Far too. He's no George Orwell. No George Orwell. But ultimately the normies killed Mrs. Carmody. There you go, there's a plot spoiler. And what happened last Wednesday, and coming up to last Wednesday, was the equivalent of a gun being held to Trump's head. I did not think that they would shoot it. And other people, I won't say who have been messaging, we've been messaging since November, we were saying, no, they'll give him a second term. They'd be insane not to. They would be insane not to. But yes, they're psychopaths. So more fool us. Because I was kind of aware that although he had a stateable case broadly, it would not necessarily cross that very high threshold of admissibility that you need to win in court. I know that myself. There's a level of admissibility that you need in court. To put it in plainer terms, there's a burden of proof against you to get something to win in court. I didn't think Trump ever was going to, but I thought that he would push the message so far that the congressmen, when they had the gun to Trump's head last Wednesday, would say, no, we won't shoot. But they shot. That's a problem for all of them. Except for the congressmen who objected and who broke rank. And they will never be forgotten for that. They will never be forgotten for their heroism and for going against the grain and for cutting loose there and supporting Trump. May they never be forgotten. But they have a problem. When you shoot somebody in the head and kill them, you can't do it a second time. So Trump's not going to get his second term. He's not going to run again in 2024. I'd say. You never know, but he should. I certainly would be very opposed to him running again. And just the way that, and I know how he ticks. I know how Trump ticks, which is why I followed him since 2016. I'd always be a supporter of his. I had a handle on my Twitter, President-elect Christian Morris. After Wednesday, I changed it to Trump supporter Christian Morris. The joke of President-elect had gone. And the joke of us all calling ourselves President-elect on Twitter was essentially that we were as much a President-elect as goddamn Biden was. But Biden, after Congress confirmed, yes, he was the President-elect, then it stopped being funny. So I changed it to Trump supporter. Because I mean that seriously, and I will always, for the rest of my life, I'll support Donald Trump. I'll be glad he had those 4 years. I'll be glad I support him, and I'm not going to back down from that, the way some people are. But they did what they did, and they can't undo that. Trump, and people, again, the mainstream media will never acknowledge this. I can talk in another video about why there's such hatred of Trump. Trump is a pragmatist. That's his greatest strength, more than anything. He's a pragmatist. Also, the second strength of his is that he's a very tough fighter. But once Congress had its vote, Trump knew it was over, so he stopped pretending otherwise. That's where I said I said that's why I respect him so much. He's not a nut job. He's not a nut job. He gave up then, and he realised it was over. Then his Twitter account and most of the rest of his social media, Snapchat, Facebook, all the rest of it, got culled on him. Now, who cares? Because he's not going to be president after the 21st, so who cares? But what they did was they gave him great mileage with doing that. The stupid psychopaths that they are. But I've dealt with psychopaths. I've dealt with them in school. I've dealt with them in my 20s in business. I've dealt with them in teaching. And you say to yourself, no, they couldn't be that stupid. No, that's why they're psychopaths. They're stupid. So, rather than taking a condescending attitude to Trump and saying, well, sure, he's only got 11 days left, we'll leave his Twitter account, let him keep writing rubbish. No, because of all the heinousness that happened at the Capitol building on the 6th of January, they decided to call his Twitter account. So Trump has now said that he is going to set up his own social media platform. Oh, they just keep handing it to him. They just keep handing it to him. So he spent 4 years attacking big government, and now he's going to spend 4 years attacking big tech. They hand him the script. They hand Trump the narrative. Once he said, I said, now I see where this is going to go. He's not going to run again. He's finished with the presidency. That's all. He's not going to go again in 2024. That's it. No, he's going to now become a tech giant. And, it's what I did say before. We now, on the alt scene, have the biggest leader, the biggest dissident in Trump that anybody could imagine. The only things in life that are definite are death and taxes. Mrs. Carmody was killed. That was the end of her. And ultimately, those people who killed her paid a very high price for it. Trump has been killed in terms of his presidency. And ultimately, the people who did that, I think, will pay a very... they'll rue what they've done. You can even see the tone of people is now turning around to say, right, well, Trump actually is gone. But yeah, he's gone. But yes, he's gone. Now let's see what we're going to do with 4 years of Biden and Harris. Because, like Mrs. Carmody, love her or hate her, she held things together. She did hold things together in the story of the mist. Love or hate Trump, he held things together. People don't realise that. I remember when he was elected in 2016, people were saying, it's the end of the world and, a lunatic's going to have his hand on the nuclear buttons. And I was going back to those people. And again, it was what Thomas Sheridan calls the cheese brain thing. They forget that they said this. They forget it's the Mandela effect. They forget that they said this. Well, Trump has done 4 years. And he didn't commit one US soldier to any new conflict. Not one. To any new conflict. He made peace with North Korea. He improved the United States' relationship with Israel. He improved the economy. He improved jobs. He wasn't perfect in many ways. His approach could be scattergun and erratic, but he's a human being. This woman who was talking about, if we could only get people to just to cooperate and just to comply with the guidelines, but they won't. I said to her, they won't. That's because they're human. But psychopaths don't understand how humans tick. The notion of creating these stupid, totalitarian, intrusive guidelines, it didn't work in the communist countries. It's not going to work here. It's not going to work here. But the way that, you see, there aren't troops on the streets. There aren't going to be the Luftwaffe bombing Dublin or that kind of thing. This war, World War III, what we're in, is a psychic war, and it's a psychological war. So we out here will win it, as I said at the start of this video. We will win it the way that cult busters break into cults and get to the people who are vulnerable in cults and get them to snap out of what they're in. And we will do it. And I'm very grateful, again, to Jamie Fletcher for that excellent post he put on Facebook in which he said, if you are continuing to apply the same values that applied in March of 2020, you are the victim of a cult. Get away from me, he said. You are toxic. I don't want you around. And while he and I obviously had the same values from March onwards, his analysis of it there clarified it very sharply for me and has shown me what we here have to do next.